Good morning, and thank you for joining us for United Way's The Question Before Us. We will begin at 8:30.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to United Way's Question Before Us. I'm Bobby Watt-Geer, President and CEO of United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm joining the program this morning from my home office. I'm a middle-aged white woman with short brown hair with a lot more gray every day showing up. I am wearing a blue blazer, and a white sweater. United Way is striving to be more inclusive in all of our events, which is why we will all be audio describing ourselves. And we've also activated live captioning through Zoom. You can turn on this live captioning by selecting the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen in the menu bar. Now to start our program. Over the past few years, this forum has provided meaningful and in-depth conversation with our community and its top leaders. We've asked some tough questions, and I think we've sparked some excellent discussion, which has helped inform how we as a community can better address issues going forward. At United Way, it all comes down to three things when responding to needs in our community: partnership, innovation, and compassion. This series attempts to combine all three and does it in a way that includes you, the public, in this discussion. I want to thank the Eden Hall Foundation for its support. Their support makes this series available for free to everyone in our community. So thank you, Eden Hall. If this is your first time joining us, I encourage you to go on our YouTube channel where you can see all of our previous Question Before Us programs. We will also be posting this session shortly, so please feel free to share it with others, watch it again, revisit the things that you found particularly helpful. The link, I believe, has just shown up in the chat for you to subscribe. So now on to today's Question Before Us. Last year alone, which, by the way, the question before us today is how are schools and after-school programs addressing the mental health crisis our children are facing? So last year alone, mental health issues have increased on average by nearly 30% across the country for children between the ages of 5 and 17. What's behind this distressing trend? Experts say various factors have led to increases in anxiety and depression, as well as behavior issues amid a shortage of children's mental health resources. I don't have to tell you that the mental health of our children is crucial to our families, to our schools, and to our community. Not only does mental health affect physical health, but untreated mental health problems interfere with learning, socialization, self-esteem, and other important aspects of child development that can have lifelong repercussions. Many people look to our schools for answers, and they are definitely a key part of this. But our schools are also under a great deal of stress with diminishing resources and trying to adjust to the needs of students. The COVID-19 pandemic unfortunately exacerbated the mental health needs of students and families due to isolation, trauma, illness that affected everyone, especially in our communities of color. Children who normally would have been in pre-K or kindergarten or school-age classrooms were at home because of safety concerns, but without the support and skill sets usually gathered when they're with other children, teachers, and staff. And while the pandemic may be easing the strain that it has left on our schools and the mental health of children, it has had lasting effects that we may not fully realize for years to come. According to the American School Counselor Association, there's a critical lack of resources. They recommend that schools have one psychologist for every 500 children and one school counselor for every 250 students. In reality, these ratios are 1 to 1,078 and 1 to 415, nearly double the amount of children that a well-trained professional can reasonably care for. Fortunately, for our discussion today, the ratio is 4 to 1. 4 outstanding expert panelists and 1 equally qualified and expert moderator, Dr. Jill Jacoby. Dr. Jacoby is the Assistant Executive Director of the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, and she will lead this important discussion this morning. She's a seasoned educator who has held leadership positions with a variety of school districts. She began her career as a 2nd and 3rd grade teacher and dean of students at Shikellamy School District, located in Northumberland, PA. In addition to her elementary career, Dr. Jacoby taught in adult education, alternative education, and coached girls' high school soccer. Dr. Jacoby earned her doctorate of education from the University of Pittsburgh, Hail to Pitt, a Master's of Science in School Administration and Curriculum and Instruction from Bucknell University, and also her Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education from Bucknell as well. Dr. Jacoby is a committed educator and committed to educational change and advocacy at the regional, state, and national level. And we are thrilled to have you join us for this program this morning, Dr. Jacoby, and I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bobby, and good morning, everyone. For reference, I'm a middle-aged Caucasian female with short blonde hair and reading glasses, which have recently been added to my decor, and I'm wearing an emerald green sweater and a gold pearl necklace. I'd like to begin by thanking the United Way for bringing this important topic to the forefront and for convening key partners who will assist us in working to address the many challenges of our families and children that are facing relative to the current mental health crisis. In our region and across the United States, schools and childcare providers are seeing challenging behavioral issues among all children of all ages. The trauma, stress, and isolation of the COVID pandemic have taken a toll on many aspects of our learning systems, which have impacted children, families, caregivers, and educators. From 2013 to 2019, the CDC documented that 1 in 11 children ages 3 to 17 had heightened levels of anxiety. For children's ages 12 to 17, 1 in 5 have experienced depression, and 1 in 3 reported feeling sad or hopeless, and this has increased over the last 3 years. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention more recently has tracked increases in suicide attempts of adolescent girls, as well as prolonged emergency room visits among youth and young adults needing and receiving treatment for mental health concerns. The manifestation of these challenges have been witnessed in every child, those even very young, through developmental lags and regressive behaviors, such as acquisition of potty training, school readiness, attachment disorders, and regulatory issues. School readiness and social emotional skills that children normally learn in pre-K or kindergarten have not developed at the same rate as previously documented prior to COVID. The inability for many children to attend an early learning program prior to school entrance has significantly impacted the growth and development of school-aged learners. In older children, such impact is manifesting in behaviors related to antisocial conduct, lower school attendance rates, and higher spikes in aggression and disruptive behaviors. Promoting healthy social and emotional growth begins at the early stages of development. Therefore, before, during, and after school programs need to be well equipped with tools and resources to ensure children can access positive role models, build healthy relationships, and thrive in a safe and enriching environment. I'm thrilled to introduce our panel of experts who will help us dig a little deeper in these issues today. You will find their full bios at the link in the chat. First, I would like to welcome Lisa Owens. Lisa serves as the director of the famed Teachers Academy, where she is responsible for recruiting and developing aspiring Black teachers. Lisa is a passionate educator with over 25 years of experience. Prior to joining FAME, she taught in the Pittsburgh Public Schools and served as a counselor before working for the Urban Impact Foundation. Welcome, Lisa. Also joining us today is Dan Richardson. Dan has been working with families and children and those who support them for over 30 years. He has designed progressive approaches to meeting the social and emotional needs of children, and Dan holds a Master's of Education from Penn West, California, and is the co-founder of Systems 123. Good morning, good morning, Dan. And finally, we have Jen, who is joining us today. Jen Osted is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in early childhood mental health. Jen received a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from Slippery Rock University, a Master's of Social Work from the University of Pitt, and Infant Parent Mental Health Postgraduate Certificate from the University of Massachusetts. Lastly, we have welcomed Dr. Leanne Lawson For the last 15 years, Dr. Lawson has worked for the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, supporting schools through Allegheny County. She has provided both training and consultation specific to behavior support in our local public schools, and currently leads a team of consultants to bring evidence-based practices to school personnel to maximize academic, social, and emotional outcomes of students with disabilities. Leanna has had a 33-year career as an educator, spending more than half of that time working with youth who have behavioral, social, and emotional needs. Welcome, Leanna. I'm excited to have all of you as panelists today. You all are experts in areas of mental health, and I want to start off today's conversation with Jen. And then I'll follow up with Dan and Lisa on the same question. And Jen, we're asking, what is the top 3 mental health changes you are observing in children? And how are these changes manifesting in our educational settings?
Good morning, and I thank you for giving the opportunity to join this conversation. I come to you from my office. I come into this space as a white middle-aged female. I have short blonde hair, bluish green eyes, and I do wear glasses at this point to be able to read. I'm wearing a white shirt and a blue sweater. I think this is such a really important topic, and when we talk about what we're seeing in terms of health changes, I think 3 of the most significant are and were mentioned earlier, 2 of them in terms of increasing levels of anxiety, depression, and what we're also seeing an increasing suicidality in even younger children. I find this really alarming. And I think that when I look at this, I like to expand the lens of conversation in terms of the changes we're seeing that go deeper and underneath to what are the fundamental places where we see growth and healing and health. Because when I said those 3 things, they felt really heavy to me. And so I want to take you to the place where I think that our focus is in terms of the 3 core things. And I think that for me, that is really, what do we all do to come together to honor building our relationships with self, our relationships with others, and our relationships with this world in terms of how our experiences and past generational experiences have influenced our way of being, seeing, and feeling within this world. And I think those are the fundamental focuses that when we look at mental health and mental well-being, that have the potential to make great impact on those 3 key areas. How is it being manifested? I think what we're seeing is significant needs, that's what I'm going to call them, that come into our classroom. Those needs become evident and show up in terms of challenging behaviors, relational stress, and relational tension. And when we see that relational tension, really being able to have an approach that addresses that and helps it get back on track so that we have healing and growth.
Thanks, Jen. And you pointed out a lot of good issues. And I like how you frame it of being, seeing, and feeling, those 3 touch points. Dan, can you follow up on anything that you're seeing with your clientele?
Sure. So my name's Dan Richardson. I come from the banks of the Monongahela River in a little tiny corner of a bedroom of my house. I am a white male. I think I'm middle-aged, but I'm not exactly sure the definition of that, but there's a lot of gray in the beard that I'm wearing today. So I'm assuming that must mean I'm middle-aged, headed towards old age. I don't know. I have a black collared shirt on with a white t-shirt underneath it, which my kids told me last week that it's out of fashion now that I'm supposed to be wearing dark t-shirts under my shirt. So I guess that might be true. I don't know. So yes, some of the things that Jen said and some of the things that you said in the opening, when I was invited to be on this panel, first I was surprised to be invited, but once I was invited, I did reach out to several educators that I work with consistently and ask them the same questions and decided I would just kind of share their answers. And the first person who responded to me to the question of what are schools doing to address mental health challenges, she wrote, this morning I worked all morning on updating our suicide prevention and practice policies. And I don't know why that just hit me like, wow, I just didn't expect that for some reason. I knew that schools were doing that and that they have to do that, but that was the first thing that she said. I think another junior high teacher that I work with she described it. She just, the kids that she's working with, it is just the ability to deal with what she would consider daily stressors. And she's been teaching for years. And she said school's a rough, junior high is a rough place to be. And it's always stressful. But now those, what I would consider stressors that have been going on for many, many years now are explosions in my classrooms and disruptions. And I'm trying to learn as a junior high math teacher how to de-escalate children and talk to them and things like that. And then he's like, I guess I've always done it, but nothing at the frequency that I'm doing now. And she also mentioned just students staying focused on an academic task. So if she's trying to teach class and how difficult it is for them to focus on the whole 45-minute period or 70-minute period, whatever they're doing. And I think last thing, which I just see myself, and it's with a specific child, but I think he is representative of a lot of older children that I see. I was asked to do an assessment on a child last year and in the spring. And the assessment, which is a commercially available assessment, one of the first questions is describe the challenging behaviors that the student does. And the teacher said, nothing. He doesn't do any challenging behavior. So I'm like, well, why am I here? She said, he doesn't do anything. He just, if he comes to class, he just sits. He doesn't disrupt us. He doesn't get any arguments with anybody. He just doesn't do, he doesn't participate, and he doesn't do his work, even though he's more than capable of doing his work. And then as part of the assessment, I interviewed his mother. His mother said he lost two close people. One was a grandparent and one was a family friend. And she said he had struggles before that, but after that he is just completely tuned out. He just looks at loss as being the thing that's going to happen to him repeatedly, and he's having trouble doing that. And so it was just telling that I think it was the first time that a teacher mentioned to me and said nothing. He's not doing anything at all. And obviously what he's doing is really significant. So those are the three ways that I see it is obviously suicidality, what Jen mentioned, our ability to deal with what we used to consider daily stressors, and then our ability to engage in school and the task that are of school. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Lisa, we're going to move over to you. And I'm sure you in your setting of training teachers talk about, what they're seeing in the daily stressors of how it's impacting their worlds.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. This morning. I'm Lisa Owens. I today come to you from my home, my third floor office. I am a Black middle-aged female, I would say. I now too wear glasses. I have curly hair, and I'm wearing a red sweater with a multicolored blouse under it. I would say I would echo many of the sentiments of Dan and Jen, the depression and the anxiety. I would add to that some PTSD. The suicidality obviously has been touched on, but the things that our students have seen and the level of anxiety that they come to school with daily being based on the fact of increased school shootings and just not a general feeling of safety when they come to school results in a lack of engagement and escapism, where students are asking to leave the classroom more frequently. And sometimes when they're asking to leave the classroom, they're leaving and going to the bathroom where they're having a panic attack. And so we really have to be mindful of how our students are interacting in the classroom. And we have to do check-ins. And that's something that we've started at FAME Academy, is daily check-ins with our students. We see our students on Saturday. And so when we check in with them, we just say, hey, how was your week? Give me a high and a low. And at first the students push back on that. Like, I don't have one, but we have a no opt-out rule. And so it's really been a good space. To Jen's point of being mindful of yourself and your world and others, I think it's a really good way to check in with the students and say, like, what happened this week? And students share, oh, my grandfather passed away last week. And so that helps us to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in their lives. and how we can intervene, follow up with phone calls with parents, encouraging them to find support for their students. When we talk about the escapism, I think it speaks to what Dan talked about with the student who's just disengaged. We experienced that this weekend with a student who just was flat, was closing his eyes as people were talking to him, and just some very concerning behaviors. I think students are having a hard time re-engaging with people because of the isolation of COVID. So a lot of social anxiety. And so we really emphasize with the teachers that I work with that you need to have your finger on the pulse of how students are feeling, checking in with them and letting people know, really encouraging our students not to suffer in silence, that there's a community around them that can help them and support them in these issues. And so we tell them, whether you're reaching out to another friend or a colleague, there was a student who had been absent for the first 2 weeks of academy. And so I asked the students, where is this young man? And they said, oh, I think he's coming, but then we have to follow up with his mom and just making sure that everybody's okay.
Thanks, Lisa. Leanna, we're going to move on to you. And I know you work a lot with our local schools, and you've heard our three other panelists talk about the daily stressors and what's happening. What do you think are the key challenges in addressing these mental health issues in the schools?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I'm really excited as well to be a part of this panel. I am also middle-aged. I am a female with chin-length brown hair. I'm wearing a black jacket and a black and white blouse, as well as reading glasses. There seems to be a theme here. And you will see in my background, my work cubicle. So key challenges, I think there are many. I'm going to try to really streamline a couple of very pertinent things that I think of first and foremost. The first one is strengthening for all students, the ability to support some of their social emotional skills in student-teacher relationships, teacher-teacher relationships, student-to-student relationships, and then teacher-to-family relationships. That's a lot. And schools have always worked on those things. But I think that the silver lining, there were some silver linings in COVID. And one of those was really those teacher-family relationships. There was a lot more time for teachers and families to have interactions just because of the structure of some of the virtual programming. It's harder to do when you move everybody back into a busy school building and teachers have, oodles of things to do and are all over the place, and a school is a very fast-paced place. Families have also gone back to, their working roles, maybe in other environments. So that's something I think we really need to keep a pulse on. And even though it's more difficult, continue to really challenge ourselves to ensure that those relationships are being fostered. So that's the first thing. The next is working to build and advance some of the practices that we're using for all students. And I say that because more and more students are, quote unquote, struggling with anxiety, depression. You've heard about some of those issues. But we need to make sure that we look at this in a school through a tiered framework, and hoping that, or not hoping, but really looking at data and determining if the practices that we're doing for all kids are reaching about 80% of our student body every day. That allows us to really allocate resources for those kids that need more. and those kids that need some intensive support. The challenge is that we've been working on that for a very long time in schools, but because of the increased needs, we have to really look at layering potentially more practices, more strategies that might work for all kids, in hopes of not having too many students that need some very intensive support. Not to ignore that if we do, but we need to have a goal and we need to work toward that goal. So there are a lot of different practices that we use, just to give you some examples: building routines, schedules. We have a lot of schools that are engaging in restorative practices. So they're having community circles at the beginning of the day, similar to what you were saying, Lisa, as far as check-ins. Having the ability to, again, take time and foster the relationships, knowing that there are gaps in learning and that those need to be addressed. But we always say, you have to Maslow before you bloom. And part of Maslow is really working on those social emotional wellness aspects of a student's development. Mental health issues are looked at as issues, but there also is mental health wellness, right? And that is that social emotional wellness that we're talking about. The other thing that I think is really important is supporting the staff wellness. And that's a challenge because we have to be more intentional than we've ever been about helping our staff, one, connect with each other, be able to have the support in collegial relationships, in staff to administrator relationships, in order for them to really be able to have a full cup so that they can pour out what they need to for the kids that have all of these needs. We talk to teachers a lot about self-care, but we really have to challenge ourselves to address that intentionally in our schools and not always expect our adults to be engaged in self-care activities. But how do we help them do that? And Jennifer, you opened with being, seeing, and feeling, and that is so important for the adults as well as the kids. So those are three challenges. There are others, but those I think are the big ones.
Thanks, Leanna. And Jen, I'm going to go back to you for a minute and ask you the same question about what you see as key challenges, especially when you talked about the fundamentals of growth and, healthy well-being for your students and learners and children in general. So what do you think are some of the challenges?
I'm going to jump off of some of the stuff that Leanne already highlighted. And I think that one of the really essential components that she went to is, how do we care for the carers? You can't give what you don't have. And I think that one of the most essential things is that for them to be in a place to be able to be present fully and authentically for children who have needs that are more significant, because we are all under stress and our systems are stressed. They have to have what we need, what we want them to give. We have to be able to provide to them a sense of safety. And Ms. Owens and Lisa mentioned that key component of safety, and creating an environment where there is open communication and conversation about what we're struggling with collectively, and how do we come together to be creative and innovative in our ways of responding to what the needs are for our children. And I keep using the word needs because I think when we target behaviors too much, we shift away from the beautiful beings that are in front of us, and really taking our opportunity to figure out what are the barriers to the strengths being surfaced, not only of our children, but of our teachers. And so that's why, I talk a lot in our work about parallel process and how do we engage the village, and the village beyond the school and beyond the teachers. And I am fortunate enough to have an opportunity to look at being innovative in terms of practices that drive village-driven processes, that acknowledge that there is strength in perspectives, even when those perspectives counter or are different to each other. And in fact, there is beauty in bringing those together because there is opportunity for healing and there's opportunity for repair. And I think that some of those are some of the most fundamental things that we get to when we honor the fact that everybody brings something unique to a process. And what they bring is so valuable to helping our children succeed. And to helping us address those three key components that we look in the medical model with a label and going beneath those labels to say, these are the spaces that we really promote change in. When we look at the relationships and we look at the impact of people's experience and framing, when we can acknowledge what barriers come into play for people to be able to have a sense of being safe, seen, regulated, soothed, and develop a sense of security, because those 4 S's that I just mentioned, they're not just for kids. We all need them. And so that's where I think it's a village. And I think it is about those challenges that we face. And I think the challenges have been not only in direct practice, but being in a more administrative role. For me, I think one of the big challenges is how do we balance our understanding of what are the needs of the helper are with regulations, administration, and fiscal responsibilities, and finding those creative ways to find spaces for people to have reflective practices and to have space for their own thought and healing. And I think that is something, regardless of what child serving system that I've looked at, that we struggle with, because for us to have the ability or capacity to serve at the level of the need, that means that we have to tax those people serving. And if we tax those people that are serving too much, they aren't able to be present for the people that need it. And so, I think that's one space, and I hope that out of these conversations that we continue to think about, how do we honor all of that stuff that we have to pay attention to, but also acknowledge that I have some magnificent teachers that I've been fortunate enough to work beside, that I truly believe that they have wings and a cape. And I have to remind myself they're not superhuman. And it takes a toll on them as well to be present for the processes, the pain, and the growth that comes out of the messiness in relationships. And so, yeah, I think all of that.
Well, and I think you hit on a good point, Jen, that also we're seeing that lack of people going into these fields, which is really stressing, our systems as well. And how do we deal with that? And how do we make these careers look appealing to those helpers that really have it in their heart and their mind to do good things for kids? Dan, I want to move to you and kind of ask you the same question, but in a different way, because I think you really have some innovative thinking and some programs you've created. And how do you take these challenges and be creative and innovative in coming up with solutions?
So yeah, something that Jen mentioned, we do this thing called village-driven care, and it is a different way of looking at helping the child, that we consider the adults that surround a child at one entity, one thing, whoever those adults are, whether they're paid professionals or family supports or natural supports, and that's how we try to support people. I think that, and I don't know whether it's innovation or not, I think that we have to come to terms with our schools, our mental health systems now, and that they are providing something. And this is I don't want to get into the discussion of our traditional mental health system. What I'm saying is that occurs in schools every day now, and schools are figuring out a way to become mental health systems for all kinds of reasons, whether it's access, availability, parents being willing to engage in a more traditional mental health system. So all of our work, I mean, like 90% of it is about how do we help schools do that as efficiently as possible. We had, and I just want to mention that we took data between December of 2019 and February of 2020, that 3-month period, compared to exactly 2 years later. And there's a 77% increase in requests to us for help. I think we're a great company, but we're not that good. It's just the fact that the need is so overwhelming that they just are seeking, and it's all school district, preschool, Head Start related that we go visit. So I don't want to miss that the challenge is, I think schools were challenged before this all happened. And when all of a sudden they try to create a new system within them, it's just an overwhelming thing to do. I think there's a quote, and I might have learned it from Jennifer, but I think I read it in a book, but I will never forget it. You don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. And that quote, whoever I stole it from, I think governs a lot of things that we do. We have hundreds and hundreds or thousands of interactions with people that are not trained therapists. That can be a very therapeutic interaction, and our ability to support those people and doing those for kids, I think, is the key to what we're doing. And it's a really non-traditional way to look at things. So thanks.
Thanks, Dan. And I think you hit on that point of those challenges become fiscally as much as personnel in our school systems. Lisa, in talking about that, are you seeing a disproportionate increase in mental health in different communities and the communities that they serve, especially communities of color? Can you touch upon that and talk about, what are some ways we're working to overcome that, or what are some solutions?
Sure. I read that question, Jill, and I was thinking that's a loaded question because the statistics might tell you that there's not. I was looking up some data about this question, and overwhelmingly, the people who are seeking mental health treatment are white, and next followed by Hispanic. And so those communities are accessing mental health treatment. But I would say, yes, there is a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And unfortunately, there's been a stigma attached in Black and Brown communities of people seeking mental health treatment, whether it's, pull yourself up by your bootstraps or white knuckle it or grind your teeth through it. There's been a lot of emphasis that, and Jen talked a little bit about the cape and the wings, especially among Black women. We're called on to be strong, and we push that onto our daughters. And so I think that there is a disproportionate impact, but that we don't necessarily see it in the numbers because we don't see our Black and Brown friends taking as much advantage or having the same access to mental health systems. One of the most poignant things that has happened in my career, there's a young man, and so I used to work in a middle school, and then I went nonprofit, and then worked with a high school, supporting some of the students that I used to work with in middle school. And I ran into this young man just a block away from my house. And if you know where I live in an area where I'm near a school, and there's an issue with students who get high and smoke weed in the morning before they go to school. And so I knew this young man was coming down to go to an abandoned house to get high in the morning. And I said, honey, just turn around, just go to school. And he said, I need to get high to be able to get through my day. And that just, tore my heart. And but I think it speaks to the self-medication that happens in the Black community and in other communities. There is lots of self-medication with people drinking or using drugs to self-medicate. And so I think we really have to be intentional about removing the stigma around seeking mental health treatment. I love what Dan said about the schools becoming mental health systems. Yesterday, I made a phone call to a colleague who works in a school to just give her some background on a young lady. Her grandmother called me and said, this is happening with this young lady. Do you have any insight? Can you, kind of do some recon? And so I called my former colleague and we had a conversation about this young lady, which also speaks to that, using the village, using the strengths, the natural supports of a student. I think those kind of grassroots, so to speak, systems are really important in this day and age, where you develop a support system around you as a parent. You know who your people are, who you can call, and because it really does take a village. And for low income families, I have a friend who's a therapist who's done she has a mobile service that she provides. So she has a van and she goes and does in-home therapy for those families whose parents might not be able to take a half hour to drive and sit in a waiting room for an hour and then a half an hour to drive back home to seek mental health treatments. So I think we really do have to be innovative about the way that we seek out mental health services for our students. And we have to reduce the stigma. You know, I love the athletes who are talking about their therapists, and you know, we need more people of color to just be transparent. And Jill, last thing, you spoke about teachers and wellness. And one of the things with the teachers that I train, we want to build supports in for them so that they can be well. And we have other teachers who are supporting them. So I think that's really important as well, for everybody to just know that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to seek mental health treatment.
You brought me back to my days as superintendent at a rural school district, and that access of supports is vitally important. And I think we forget that sometimes, that, you know, the transportation is one of the biggest struggles that people have in trying to get help. They may want it, but don't have those means. And so, Leanna, I don't even think we need to ask the question, has trauma happened with COVID? But more importantly, how can schools and out of school care providers better support, you know, through providing access? And give us some bright spots. I know you've worked with a couple urban school districts, as well as some of our school districts in the Mon Valley. Tell us what's happened and what they've been able to accomplish.
So I'm going to go back to something that Dan talked a little bit about, and that is really the idea of making sure that teachers understand how they can be therapeutic in the settings where they are spending time with students. Doesn't matter if it's the school day or after school time. And I think that for so long, there's been a myth that, you know, those mental health issues need to be dealt with by a mental health clinician. And that there's absolute truth to the fact that a mental health clinician may need to be part of that team. But that as adults in school settings, we also can take on the role of empathizing, thinking about what it's like to be in that individual's shoes, and not sympathizing, but really trying to imagine. We'll never understand it if we haven't been in those particular circumstances, but we can listen, and we can be supportive individuals. Again, sometimes a challenge in schools because things move quickly and there's a lot to do. But in our work with schools, we've found it very helpful in many cases to look at it through the lens of individual students and spend time with teams talking about how issues like trauma or stress or feelings of not belonging or isolation can really impact people's behavior. And that's internalizing or externalizing behavior. You know, we talk about behavior and we often picture someone who's acting out in some way. But there also is this internalizing behavior that we're seeing a lot of. And I've heard many people speak of that today, as far as the anxiety, kind of keeping it within. And Dan, for the student that you spoke of, doing nothing, right? that's a behavior. That's still a behavior we have to be aware of and deal with. Through those conversations about how those, we call them setting events or slow triggers, impact the behavior, we can talk about what kind of strategies will help teachers be more therapeutic in their support of students. Maybe it means pulling back on a demand for a period of time. That doesn't mean giving up on the expectation, but it means pulling back and then reintroducing that expectation when that student is back in a place where they're calm and they feel like they can tackle that issue ahead of them. So it means a lot of flexibility. It means good listening. It means really understanding and also understanding themselves, because the way an adult feels, the way an adult may be stressed very much impacts how we may show up and be able to be therapeutic in nature versus how we may show up and inadvertently make something harder for a student or a group of students. So I think there is a lot of good work happening with trying to help teachers understand you don't have to do something new. You may have to use some of those skills that you have more often and with more kids because things have been rough the last couple of years. There have been a lot of stressors for everyone. So.
Thanks, Leanna. Jen, I know we talked about you having a crystal ball in your office there. And if you were to look into the future and just think about the long-term impact that's resulting from just what Leanna talked about of, having access or having the responsibility to meet the needs, where do you think we're going to move in the future? And what are the needs going to be for these young adults who are moving into adulthood?
Oh, that's a big question. And I think the answer is complicated and individual to each person. But I guess some of the really long-term concerns that I have were already a little bit highlighted, and Lisa spoke of some of them and Leanne spoke of some of them in terms of concerns about the ways that people go about managing their increased stress responses by self-medicating. And what does that mean in terms of the impact for not only the individual whose true strengths and beauty can't be seen at the degree that they need to be seen so that they can be innovative in their practices and really support themselves and their relationships at an optimal level. I think, and I don't want to sound like I'm going to keep going back to this, but I'm going to. The key is in what we've all talked about in terms of relationship, and absolutely science supports that the therapeutic process happens in moments. And it's not in a 60-minute session. And I myself am a clinician, and I know the value of clinical work, but I also know that the most important change happens in relationship. And it happens in our relationships with each other, and being able to honor that everyone has a gift to be able to give. And so I worry, when we look forward, is that the crystal ball that I'd like to see is one of hope and optimism, that we will figure out together as a community how to meet needs, even when we are under-resourced and overtaxed, because we'll do it together. And because we're not taking responsibility of it, we are honoring that each individual has their own strengths and they just need help facilitating those to the surface. And the reality in terms of what we're seeing, I think that we need to be mindful of when it gets to the significance of needing some type of other intervention, when there needs to be support about recovery because of DNA utilization and self-medication when there needs to be more intensive look at the levels of supports and services. And going back to what you said, Dr. Jacoby, about really honoring how do we let people know the significance, importance that they have in entering a caring role and in building our workforce. Because if you look at the bottom of a lot of pyramids, whether I look at the system 1, 2, 3 pyramid that frames it in beautiful relationships, or I go to the pyramid practices through CEFL, it is an effective workforce. But all of that is about being in a place where we care for ourselves enough, which people in the caring profession, and I will tell you, I am among the guilty parties, do not spend enough time doing, so that we can be present and support other people in their journey as well. So I'm going to take that crystal ball to a very optimistic place, because we have spaces like these and conversations and people who are passionate and committed to supporting processes that honor people's beautiful strengths and abilities to recover from adversity. And that's where we take trauma informed to trauma responsive. When I hear the practices that have been spoke about here today, that really acknowledge that we need to know that a stress system can't give you what it did yesterday, and we can't expect that. And when we can make those adjustments and we can help teachers understand that it is okay to make those adjustments on an individual basis, that's where the hope lies. And that's what I hear today.
And I'm going to let you expound for a minute, because a question came up in our chat of, as a parent, how do I find the right mental health care provider for my child or student, is what they're saying, who is resisting to attend therapy? Can you give any light into that real briefly here?
Well, I think one of the key things when we talk about the key thing that I'm going to hone on there is in resistance to attending therapy. And some of this goes back to the stigma that we have about what is therapy and what is mental health services. And I think that any time when I hear the word resistance, it's how do I meet that individual, that child, that adolescent where they are, and acknowledge that there are things that they have, strengths that they have, desires that they have, interests that they have, that they can get involved in that are therapeutic. And that, yes, there may be a need to go to that next step and to engage a therapist in the process. But we have to honor the space that they're in first and take the first step with them, so being with instead of imposing on. And so moving them to that place where that they might be ready to engage in a more, I'm going to use the word clinical type practice, but it really should be a relational practice. And I think in terms of taking the next step from there, after you address the resistance, it's really being able to honor, what do you think the needs of, and what is the individual, the child or the teenager, the adolescent, able to share about what their needs and what's important in an individual that they want to sit with and trust and build that trust. And then the key to anything is, can they experience a sense of safety and security in that relationship, regardless of who they're encountering? And depending on what it is that you're looking to have be supported with in terms of growth and development, it's making sure that that person has the knowledge base and understanding, particularly when we look at adverse childhood experiences and we look at trauma, is that it's not just having the knowledge, but it's being able to enact that knowledge in relationship. And so one, you want to ask the right questions about, these are the needs that my child or my adolescent or my family has. How does that fit with what your experiencing knowledge base is? And then actually honoring the experience of being in that space with that individual. And can you get a sense of being safe, seen, soothed, and secure? Because any fundamental, regardless of whatever model or whatever theory that anybody is moving with, is that the relationship and the ability to have that trust in that relationship is fundamental to any growth or any progress, regardless of where it's at.
you hit it on the mark, because we had someone just say that was a helpful answer. So they appreciate your input. And Lisa, moving over to going from working with, the parent-child relationship, let's talk about parents and educators. How can parents be good partners with those educators to help their children in the mental health journey? And what are some strategies that you would suggest for parents in working through building this partnership?
I say parents need to be tenacious. And it's hard sometimes, but I think that parents need to be tenacious in pursuing what's best for their children and understand that it's a partnership. But I think that parents have to be transparent in expressing their needs, and parents have to lay their pride aside. I think parents experience shame, especially when their students are struggling behaviorally, and they feel like it's a reflection on them. And so we as educators have to reassure parents it's okay. My grandfather used to say there's nothing new under the sun. And so these behaviors that students exhibit in school that may be antisocial or disruptive, we have to, as educators, reassure parents that it's okay. While the behavior may not be okay, don't be shameful. Don't retreat when students are exhibiting behaviors that are unacceptable in the classroom. Let's just see how we can work together. And so I would encourage parents to just stay in the game. Lots of times we've had lots of parents sit in front of us and say, I'm done. And, I would say to parents out there, you don't get to be done. Until your child is, independent. I'm not done. My daughter called me at 6:30 this morning. And she's a young adult, but parenting is a lifelong journey. And those of us who are committed to education are here. We're in it with you. We signed up for this because we love children, and we want to support parents and children in their growth and in reaching their potential. And so I would encourage parents to really see it as a partnership, and also to be okay with seeking help in advocacy. There's parents of special needs children. Get your child an advocate. That's okay. It's a right that you have according to the law. And so I would encourage parents to do that. I would encourage parents who don't have the resources to seek out the resources, and to just really kind of hunker down to do what's best for their children. And on the educator side, I had the opportunity to attend a professional development at the University of Pittsburgh earlier this week. And Dr. Kinlock said, we have to love the children, and that's not rocket science. And those educators who don't, please go find a job somewhere else, because we need committed educators. And I don't think that we can compromise our standards. Dr. Jacoby, you spoke to a shortage in the helping professions, but the shortage in the helping professions doesn't mean that we just want bodies in front of our children, because people who are not passionate about and committed to this work will only do more harm. And so I think it's really important to have that commitment. If you sign up for this profession, I want you to seek self-care. I want you to live in the overflow and do what you need to do to be healthy and safe. But I also want you to know that you're here. Like, we don't work with widgets, right? We work with children and we impact lives. And so it's really important that everyone, teachers, students, parents, see this as a partnership.
I think you declared that well. Parents are are the children's first advocates and need to remain. And I think the other thing that comes into play is parents are so fearful from the experience they had in school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to overcome that, you need to look beyond your own experience and, help your child through the journey that they're taking now in this day and time. So thanks for those words of wisdom. Dan, I'm going to move to you for another question. I think we have a few minutes for a couple other in the chat. And this question comes to what kind of research is out there about mental health of youth and how has it changed during the pandemic? And also, what kind of time frame should we expect to know how these changes are taking shape?
Jenny
That's a
probably-
full loaded questions there.
Jennifer can probably answer this better, but I think some things were that we knew before the pandemic, we need to put on steroids now. So I think that almost all, maybe all research, but certainly almost all, if not all research focuses remarkably heavy or encourage us to focus on interactions and relationships. And that was before the pandemic and after the pandemic, and will be in 25 years from now, be the same thing, that we have to get good at connecting with other people, kids, adults. Several people mentioned the need to support adults. Our ability to connect with others is the response to almost everything. Jennifer mentioned our pyramid. Our first tier of our pyramid only has the word relationships. It is relationships with self, with team, with families, with children. And we do that incredibly intentionally to say during our first tier, we're not talking about anything other than relationships. And people think of us as like experts in managing classrooms and addressing behavior and writing intervention and supporting therapy. All of that is nothing to us compared to that first tier. So I'm pretty sure that there is an incredible amount of research that talks about relationships. I think the other one, which has come up on here a few times, I think in the chat, our ability to sit with kids in emotional situations is really key, and not to fix them. We, for many years, taught redirection, and I teach a redirection now, and I think redirection is a appropriate strategy to use. The problem is sometimes we redirect away from emotion and the expression of emotion, and we have to learn a different way to take a moment during that time to sit in it and let the situation take its course and arrive on the other side of that. And we can't do that through redirection. We can be good redirectors and not good emotional sitters. And I think both skills are important, but I think what's different now is that we have to learn to be better at sitting through that with children. I think that there is, and I want to follow up on, at least I mentioned a couple times, this partnership thing is extremely important, and we're not great at it. So I don't think that it's professional partners and natural supports as two different things. I think professional people, all professional people working with kids, should understand that natural supports are our partners. It is one team. And in order to be partners, the first thing that we have to understand is what our partners are bringing to the table. So I don't know what you see on your screen. On my screen, I see the rest of the panel. If I want to collaborate with them, I have to believe in them before we even sit down. Like, I have to see them as contributors to it, doing this panel, but in your case, it's helping this child, because I've seen this question come up a lot. The other thing to do with partnerships, so the first one is just the assumption of what the other person brings to the interaction about their contributions. The other thing, we do this in some of our workshops, and since all of you mentioned wearing glasses for some reason, imagine if we could, and we hang out with, we're next to CMU, so maybe the CMU people can actually invent this. Imagine if all of us could switch glasses and just take our glasses off and give it to the next person. And when that happened, you could experience the world through their eyes. You could experience, so Dr. Jacoby, who's next to me on my screen, if she and I could switch our glasses, and by doing that, I could immediately go into like a virtual perceptual thing and see the world through her experience. And
You really don't want to.
if we wanted to collaborate, I would have to. And if I wanted to understand that point of view, well, on this panel, it would be easy. Once we're sitting with parents, and if we had that idea that, man, I wish I could see the world through their eyes. And I think there's a couple of parent questions. For parents to be good partners, try to see the world through the teacher's eyes. Yeah. And I think that will help that partnership. You don't have to agree with the teacher. You just have to understand where they're coming from. The same they have to understand where you're coming from. So I don't want to miss that, because Lisa had mentioned the partnership a couple of times, and it came up in the chat too, that I think that's our key, is to become way better collaborators than what we are, and get really focused on that, because I don't think our traditional systems, I am not as hopeful as Jennifer is. And so, I'm like, I don't think things are going well. And I think we need a ton of rethinking about how we're doing this thing called mental health support, and quits talking about all the good things that we've done and say they're not good enough. We have to do something different. I work with technology people. Oh my goodness, they see no limits. I wish we were like that. They think they can do anything, and I wish that we would think like that. So that's it. I'm kind of rambling on, so I'll shut up.
I think you're talking about failing forward, right? That, being innovative and trying to do that. One last question for the day, and that goes to Leanna. And again, coming from the chat, is what are some training options for people who need to support youth in crisis? And, how do we train those people who haven't been through the formal training to be better prepared to deal with this?
So at our intermediate unit, we have a staff of professional development individuals, and we have some that are very specifically oriented to positive behavior supports. And in that, we also talk a lot about trauma sensitive strategies and creating trauma informed environments. And that training, those professionals that do that training can really help teachers, other staff in the building take the time to think about putting on that other person's glasses. And once you have people there, and again, we do this probably most effectively in small groups, where there can be some really authentic conversation. When you get into big staff developments, which is a challenge, and you don't necessarily make the same kind of impact. So we find in our work that it's much more impactful to do it through small groups, where there are those authentic conversations that are happening. People can share some experiences, some frustrations, their stress, learn a little bit about their triggers, learn a little bit about listening to learn, not listening to respond. Here's the thing we know about educators, and I can say it because I've been one for 33 years. We are fixers. We want to fix it. And sometimes there's just not a quick fix. Actually, a lot of times there's just not a quick fix. So we have to embrace that whole idea. And what we're trying to help teachers and other staff that work in schools understand is that it's a process. And that process is likely going to take time. And that you have a responsibility through that process to, again, listen to learn, not just to respond. And that will create more empathetic perspectives from those staff. So there is professional development available. In many of our schools in IU3 benefit from the support of our folks who are working specifically in behavior, who do trauma training, specific to what does it look and sound like, and how does it affect kids in this school setting, although it benefits, even how that's working in communities and families as well. It's a matter of finding it, and I'm happy to be a resource to anyone that wants to learn more about who might offer those things if we don't have that availability to provide it.
It's been a full packed day. I appreciate all of you panelists for your dedication to the children of our region. And I just want to close, and we're right on the brink of time. So I'm going to give you a heads up here that we just want a quick, brief statement that if I said to you, what is your gut response to this question? And the question is, what can families do to support their own children or children in their communities? Jen, you want to start?
I think I go back to that there isn't a quick fix or a simple solution to all of these complex things. And so join the conversation, be aware of what's going on for you, and follow and be aware of the blame that induces shame, because we all blame ourselves. We look to try and find a simple solution somewhere else. And when that enters the room, the options for healing exit. So take care of ourselves first, and then honor everybody in the process. And I guess that's what I would say, honor repair, because there is power in discord. That's edtronic. And repair is important.
Thanks, Jen. Lisa, what's your gut response?
My gut response is listen and be present, and make good memories, because good memories, we need to be intentional about making good memories with our children.
You hit on my quote. My hashtag is be intentional. I love that. Dan, what would your gut response be to that question? What can families do?
My gut response is to see them and hear them. And I would add one other thing is that I would extend some grace to yourself on however you respond. And that's it.
Giving grace. I love it. Leanna.
Well,
A word.
I think you may have taken the words right out of my mouth, but I would specifically suggest that as family members, you engage with kids about their school experiences, about their peer interactions. Keep learning as much as you can about your own children. And you have to take care of yourself in order to do that, and do that well, and do that in an ongoing way. And then share that information with teachers. Teachers have a lot of children in front of them, and we don't want them to miss things about your specific child. And the best way for them to get that information is from you.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a fun-filled morning. A lot of knowledge been shared. Bobby and United Way, I thank you again for allowing me to be part of this, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. What a robust, at times sobering, at times hopeful discussion. As we've all heard today, children's mental health challenges, things that we heard about, inability to focus, stress, anxiety, depression, increased suicide, escapism, PTSD. These are really challenging issues, and they impact our children's ability to learn and thrive into adulthood. I will say that this panel today, however, has given me some hope. I hope that's also been the case for you. I'd like to pull out one thread that Dan in particular mentioned, that schools are now mental health systems. I want to draw that out a little bit further and say that so too is the community. So too is the family. It's really all of our responsibility to engage. We've all been through a pretty incredible past few years, and we want to make sure that we're there for our kids. And that's why United Way has really prioritized building for success in school and life as one of our key strategic investment priorities. Through our work in this space, we support organizations that have social and emotional learning programming as a core part of what they do, whether that's in preschool, whether that's in school or out of school time programs. It's critical for our community. Stigma around mental health diagnosis and treatment needs to be dispelled so children and families and adults can get the help they need to cope. And there are things that we can all do to help. So we always in these programs want to leave everybody with some things you can do to carry the work forward. If you see a child in your life struggling with depression or behavior issues, and you feel that they're showing developmental delays, let a professional know. Talk to your child's healthcare provider or school guidance counselor. And would also remind you that there's a new mental health crisis number available, and that number is 988 if there is a mental health crisis. And I also want to encourage you, if you don't know about United Way's 211 Human Services Hotline that's available 24/7, 365, That's available for a broad range of non-emergency human service needs related to children and families, and would encourage you to contact 211 if you have those needs or someone you know does. The second thing that I would encourage you to consider is to seek out volunteer opportunities where you can be a positive role model for a child who might need extra support, with organizations such as the Mentoring Partnership, Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Those are all great places to start. I'd also, and I think a couple of our panelists mentioned this, that look for opportunities to be engaged as a parent or as a community member in your local school community. Attend meetings, join organizations, go to school board meetings, advocate for services that help increase the social and emotional well-being of our kids, but also in lifting up the resources that our educators need to be able to carry out their incredibly important work. And finally, I would say that when you're considering making philanthropic contributions, consider funding programs that support students in the classroom and out-of-school time programs like United Way's Building for Success in School and Life strategic priority. I want to wrap us up today and give you a few minutes back, but I genuinely want to thank our panelists, Lisa Owens, Dan Richardson, Jen Osted, and Dr. Leanna Lawson. And thank you to Dr. Jill Jacoby for being a superstar moderator for this critically important topic. Your insights and experiences, perspectives have given us a lot to think about and hopefully a lot to act on. I want to thank our sponsor again, the Eden Hall Foundation, for making this forum possible. We'll be posting this session in the next day or so on our YouTube channel. So again, I invite you to revisit it and share it with those in your circle that might find it valuable. And please be on the lookout for our next Question Before Us forum sometime this winter. And I hope that you all have a fantastic day, and I appreciate your engagement in this edition of the Question Before Us. Take care, everyone.